Ladies and gentlemen, this is the World Series of Politics, where Brendan Bussmann and Brandt Iden race through the turn on key legislative and regulatory developments around the gaming world. As these two come up to the green flag, let's get into this race for expansion and opportunity for the industry to grow until we hit the checkered flag on another episode of the World Series of Politics.
Welcome back to the World Series of Politics podcast. I'm your host, Brandt Iden, along with my co-pilot, Brendan Bussmann, and we are cruising today at 30,000 feet over the nation's capital and over the UK, and that just is going to set up for the perfect July 4th Independence Day show. We're talking about DC, we're talking about the UK. I mean, there's a bit of irony there, right, Brendan? I don't know.
Yeah. You know, with the boys back in town, it's good that we're talking about this on a holiday week for everybody. It's election week as well, so there's a lot to cover, and a lot to cover that's been positive for the industry, some things that are, we'll see how it works out for the industry over things and how this goes. But we are joined today by a gentleman that I've known for some time. In fact, we were talking before we jumped on here. We're trying to figure out how long that's been. But Dan, welcome to the World Series of Politics, and we're glad you could join about talking with us today about what's going on in the UK.
You bet.
So welcome to the show. Wanted to just sort of kick off, I know I saw you had some comments over the weekend on what's going on in the UK and the Financial Times, but sort of give everybody the lay of the land, a little bit on the election coming up and some of the controversy that has surrounded the election.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. So we have an election in a couple of days' time. We'll almost certainly have a change of government. But and while betting hasn't really featured in party manifestos this campaign, it has featured in a different way in that a number of MPs or people close to the political scene have been found to be betting on the date of the election, or even some betting against themselves winning their own seats. So this has created a bit of a kerfuffle in the political market. It's not clear that anybody's done anything wrong. Investigations ongoing by the Gambling Commission and even by the Metropolitan Police. But it's not clear whether any rules have been broken. But it's certainly put gambling back into a place where it didn't really want to be in the political sphere.
So Dan, let me ask you a question. Obviously, I've been reading, there was a story in the Washington Post yesterday, or maybe the Wall Street Journal, forgive me, I can't remember, very specific to these MPs that are betting against themselves. I think that's crazy, right? I mean, I think I saw Philip Davies is betting 8,000 pounds that he's going to lose his seat. What's your take on that?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways you could look at it. I mean, I think you could look at it as a hedge. The Conservative Party.
You could. You could. You certainly could.
Yeah. I'm taking my own candidacy, but that's okay. We'll see what happens.
It doesn't look good. I think the key question is whether Philip intends to lose his seat, and therefore whether this is a rigged bet, and whether it shows a disdain for the democratic process, or whether he is simply going, actually, I think I'm going to lose my seat because the Conservative Party is facing wipeout. And I'll have a wager on that to hedge my position. I don't know, but at the moment it's not clear whether anybody's broken the rules. I think it doesn't sit well with the British electorate that MPs are doing this, but we remain to see whether anyone's actually broken any rules.
So let's go down that path first, because obviously I want to get into, because as the people that listen to this on a regular basis know that Brandt and I like to get into predictions and that sort of stuff, which we'll get to. But to that end, this has obviously brought a little bit of more insight into the Gambling Commission and what they may or may not do. What's sort of the process those guys are going through right now? Because it's not like they're talking about open investigations and who may or may not be, but what could that potentially look like, and when could we potentially, if there is any fallout on this, what does that look like?
What's happening at the Commission at the moment? We don't know. It's strange that we should be having this debate, because really the Commission shouldn't be releasing information about this, and certainly not the identity of the people it's investigating, until it's had a chance to see whether anything wrong has happened. So there's quite a bit of speculation about who's leaking the information about this these bets into the market, because it really shouldn't be the Commission. The police say it's not them, but somebody's leaking it. So I imagine that the Commission is quite an interesting place at the moment, trying to work out what's going on. You know, if it's discovered that the Gambling Commission released information it shouldn't have done, and that had a prejudicial effect on the election, that could be really quite explosive in terms of how the Commission's role is viewed.
You know, that's interesting, Dan. I mean, setting the commission part aside for a minute, we look back at the history of this, you know, as I was, again, that same article plus some other research I've been doing, because I just found this to be very fascinating. You know, betting on British politics goes back to the 18th century. This is really nothing new. So I think the question that you brought up, your first remarks, make a lot of sense, which is, do we really know if this is even illegal or not? I mean, it's been going on for so long, I don't really know that it is. So can the Commission have any sway in it? I mean, that leads to the bigger question of what say does the Commission even have? This has been going on so long. Betting shops are taking these bets. They have been taking these wagers for many, many years. I guess that's the big question, right? Is it really that big of a deal? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know.
Well, we'll find out. But I think what certainly is true is that at the moment we don't know if any rules have been broken or any laws have been broken. And yet this has become a scandal which is likely to affect the outcome, perhaps not the outcome of the next government, but certainly the outcome of the parliamentary majority that the next government has. So, on the one hand, it's quite amusing, it's quite funny. On the second hand, the Gambling Commission really should not be at the centre of the British election. And it will be interesting to see what comes out when. You asked before when we might see something definitive come out here. If the Lord moves in mysterious ways, he has nothing on the Gambling Commission. So we don't know whether anything will come out on this. The commissioners in the past opened investigations. There's been quite a stir about it, and then things have sort of petered out. So I imagine the Commission wants this to go away, would be my guess. So we have no idea when we'll finally have a conclusion on this. It certainly won't be after the election. And in that period, the Conservative Party arguably will have suffered some reputational damage as a consequence.
You talk about the election, obviously not the fallout that may or may not happen afterwards. But as we're looking ahead to this week, what's going to happen for those of us on the other side of the pond, those of us that later on this week will celebrate our independence from the other side of the pond, some 200 and some odd years ago. But what's going to happen with the election? Because obviously, the way things are looking from our perspective, you're going to have a significant shift in control.
What's going to happen after the 4th of July over here? We know what's going to be, there's going to be a lot of sore heads over there. Over here, we've had 14 years of a Conservative government or Conservative coalition government. I suspect a lot of people will be celebrating what they perceive as independence over here from the Conservative Party, which feels like it has become a fairly unwelcome presence, perhaps in the same way that King George was over your way a few hundred years ago. So in terms of whether it has a major bearing on the gambling market, it's unclear. The Conservative manifesto has nothing about gambling in it. They may feel that they've carried out their review of legislation and therefore the matter is now settled. But Labour really just had fairly few anodyne statements in there about raising standards and working with the industry to do that. So I think from the industry's perspective, if we assume that Labour is going to be the next government, it looks reasonably comforting. Labour's making some fairly positive noises about this. I'm not sure it's that straightforward, and the reason I say that is that while I don't think Labour have at the moment a particularly negative agenda towards the gambling industry, a lot of the work of government is not carried out by politicians, it's carried out by civil servants. And there's fairly strong evidence to suggest that the major organs of state have been captured, or at least to the extent they touch on gambling, they've been captured on a very strong public health movement in this country, which really sees gambling as the new tobacco, and wants to treat gambling in exactly the same way that tobacco has been treated. And I'll give you a few examples. We have a department called the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, which is our public health agency, and it sits within the Department of Health. Now, a couple of years ago, they produced a paper in the Lancet journal, and this proposed a series of 81 recommendations for state intervention in the gambling market. Some of these interventions were inherently sensible. In fact, some were so sensible they already exist, which had escaped the attention of the researchers. But some of them were really quite alarming, so I'll just pick through a few of those. One of the recommendations was that all advertising and marketing of gambling should be made illegal, which would mean, for example, that you couldn't have betting adverts at racecourses. They also proposed that the sale of wine, beer and spirits should be prohibited in casinos and in bingo clubs and possibly at racecourses. They proposed that taxes on the gambling industry should go up every year at a rate above the rate of inflation, which pretty much soon gets you to prohibitionist territory because you make the market uneconomic. And my favourite, I don't know if it's my favourite, but the most bizarre and the one that most reflects how they view betting as the new tobacco was that they said that all gambling products should be subject to plain packaging controls. And when you read the footnotes and took a look, well, what do they mean by plain packaging? They said, no colours, logos or images are allowed to be displayed on gambling products. If you think about what that does to a deck of cards in a casino, you lose the ace of spades, you lose the queen of hearts. I mean, it's pretty mad policies, but these are the people who exercise executive functions within the British government, and they are proposing these sorts of measures. And perhaps the most alarming element is there is some evidence the Gambling Commission is sympathetic to some of their policies. And so I think that's, I think the election is important to a degree, but it may be a bit of a sideshow because so many of the organs of the state seem to have now an anti-gambling agenda. And I would put the Gambling Commission in that camp as well.
Wow, I love that line. Election's a bit of a sideshow. And you know what, Dan, we got to wrap it up there. I mean, given everything that's going on over here in the U.S., a sideshow is probably exactly the best way to describe politics in general at the moment. Thank you very much for coming on the show. We always appreciate the update. Obviously, a big day ahead in the next 48 hours, so we look forward to hearing a follow-up after the elections.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Brandt, I can't thank Dan enough for coming on the show today. Obviously, it's going to be a fascinating election to watch here at the end of this week. Something that it is a sideshow, especially
it is indeed.
Compared to the politics we have here. It does have some impact on the industry, and we could do a whole show off of the packaging and everything else along the way.
How bizarre was that? That's crazy. I mean, that stuff I didn't even know about. That was bizarre. That's crazy.
It's more than crazy, and I say that saying, as a guy that has a couple projects going right now in Australia, I thought they hated the industry. Now I've got even more wackiness to talk about along the way. But let's talk about what is the District of Columbia and the victory that occurred last week, due in part to your efforts. Tell the listeners what happened in D.C. and how you won the proverbial championship of the year and the bottle of Pinot that we had wagered.
Well, you know what? There's no greater satisfaction than once again winning a wager from you, my friend. Once again, I don't know if we're on number 2 or number 3 now, but I think that's probably the best part of my victory in D.C., Brendan. I will say that. No, look, I mean, here's what we will say. Obviously, for the listeners, just to catch you up, Brendan and I had a little friendly wager a number of episodes back when the U.S. legislative season started about where the next expansion market would be in the U.S. He picked Minnesota, again because of timing. I thought he may have had me this year.
Minnesota. I got screwed by a technicality.
You did. The technicality caught you up. I picked DC. Look, I mean, here's what happened. It was a very difficult, some would say monumental task to be able to get DC to go from the sole source market that it was to where we are today, 4 years later, one of the worst performing markets in the country. Obviously, about 4 or 5 months ago, Lottery and Intralot did a deal with FanDuel. FanDuel became the sole source provider in the district as of about a month ago. And look, the argument that I continued to make and that others along with me, I cannot take full credit for this. I had many partners along the way, but thank you, Brendan. The reality is this: open and competitive markets just make more sense. They make more sense for consumers. They drive innovation. They drive new concepts. Open markets drive our companies, Fanatics and others, to be better in the space, right? And not only that, at the end of the day, it will bring more revenue to the district. So this was a win-win for the district. This was a win-win for consumers. And for a market that was just so massively underperforming, literally one of the 4 markets that had no growth in 2023, this has been great. And I think that as we get into football season, you see other products launch in the district. And then we certainly, as we get into 2025, the district's only going to see upward growth, in my opinion, here.
Well, and I, with the victory statement, yes, that is on you with regard to our little friendly wager and the World Series of Politics. But you're absolutely right. As someone that was in conversations, not just with you, but other operators that wanted to see this open and competitive market, in what I always referred to as, through some of these debates going back to February, that it was a wag the dog, that the bureaucracy was trying to drag the council in one way or another.
Right.
But it is definitely one that is a win for the consumers in DC. It's a win for the overall industry because, as you mentioned, competition drives a better product, plain and simple, and it'll get a better revenue source for the district in the end along the way. So congratulations.
Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. I'll certainly be sending over my invoice with the Pinos, so you'll be seeing that forthcoming via text message.
Now that we're on the line, come on here. It's not multiple. It was one.
You're right. I was stacking up all my other wins. I apologize. I apologize.
I get it. Yeah. But it is I say this that I don't see this as a loss, because it's a victory for the industry, and it's a victory for those that want to enjoy sports betting in DC. And I have my challenges with Minnesota, but we'll be back at it again in 2025, and we're going to figure out a way to get it done then. And hopefully we're not on a technicality of, oh, sorry, we ran out of time. So we'll see what happens.
That caught you up 2 sessions in a row, by the way. In the last one, the speaker took off and took an early vacation.
No, she didn't take a vacation. She had to go to her old reunion with all of her Harvard peeps. Technically, it's 3 years we've ran out of time on the clock. So this one was complete technicality, as opposed to, I just don't want to come back after the weekend. So, but one of these days,
Well, I appreciate it, my friend. We will certainly get together and enjoy that bottle of wine together when we do. And look, as we go into July 4th, we obviously talked about the UK. We've talked about DC. I see no better way than to wrap up the show right there. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the World Series of Politics podcast with Brandt, Iden, and Brendan Bussmann.
See you next time.
You've been listening to the World Series of Politics podcast with Brendan Bussmann and Brandt Iden. We'll be back at the starting line very soon. This has been an IGB production. For the latest news, views, analysis, and data on the global gaming industry, head to igamingbusiness.com.